Here I find you. I think I can love you.
Well, thank you for joining How Strong Podcast, Sammy. Sammy's my host.
Of course.
She's amazing. She's a recent graduate, marketing. I think she's a marketing genius right now. I think she's got a bright future. And part of this podcast today is kind of go into product placement, theatrical product placement. The great thing about product placement, if you look at it in terms of a business, last year, product placement on the paid side was 3.7 billion. The unpaid was 6 billion. Next year, it's forecasted to be 7.45 billion, and this is from a research company called PQ Media. So when you're talking about 6 billion, 7.45 billion in product placement, or at least the value of it, then you understand, from a marketer's perspective, when you look at a company that's a small company, under $5 million, they're traditionally going to spend around 8% of their revenue on marketing. Medium-sized companies about 10%, and then a larger-sized company is about 15%. And when you get into different industries too, if you're looking at retail, they're about 20% of their revenue is going to be on marketing. Manufacturing is 5%. Tech startups, and I've known this because I've actually been in several tech startups, you're looking at about 15 to 20% of your revenue in marketing. And it's a huge piece of a marketer's budget. And then when you look at it this way too, another really interesting stat is 44% of companies in 2025, in terms of what's new, 44% of their spend is going to be on branded marketing, which is going to be in some type of television show, some type of experience with a consumer that's going to be in TV. It's going to explain the brand, and they'll be able to interact with the product through that. So it's a huge piece of it. And one thing I didn't know, and obviously we have Hal here, who's probably the king of product placement in Hollywood. This guy, I've known him for a long time, really strong. But what I didn't understand, and I think I got this just by doing some interviews with Hal, is when you consider that over 80% of people right now are using a streaming service, which means most of them are watching content that doesn't have commercials. There's probably limited ones on Paramount Plus and maybe a few on Netflix. But a lot of the product that you see in commercials is going to be on that non-streaming side. And those people that are using non-streaming and taping their shows like on TiVo, 90% of them are skipping commercials entirely. So obviously the biggest benefit is to actually put product placement in TVs and movies. So you're actually seeing it because you're not seeing commercials anymore. So I think that was amazing. I'd love to get Hal's input on how that industry's changed since streaming services have come.
Right. So this is clearly not your first rodeo. I would love to know how you guys even got into product placement in the first place, and kind of what are the distinctions in how you would work with paid versus unpaid, like you were talking about, Troy, product placement. How does that world even look like?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think part of my first exposure to like a big picture was Black Panther. Mm-hmm. I was working for Lexus at the time, and we had the LC 500, and huge. Like, this was 2 years in the making. Like, a lot of these, and Hal could probably chime in. These aren't like all of a sudden. Like, these things are happening years and years over time. Audi, with Tom Cruise, I forgot that movie. I was in Japan at the time working on that project, and these things just take a ton of time. But my biggest one, I think, when I was in the US was Black Panther and Lexus. And now you're in the big league. Like, this car is going to be part of that film. It's part of, it's a character in the movie. I think the only tricky thing that I wasn't aware at the time, this was my first experience of them saying, hey, listen, this is a prototype we're giving you. Like, we're going to blow it up, so you're not going to get it back. And that was my first, like, okay, that's an expense now, because now this car is not coming back. I can't use it again, and it's going to get blown up. And then I think the tricky thing, and I think Hal would love to, the tricky thing are some brands don't want to show their vehicle getting blown up. They want it to be very scripted and not like in a very foul way that this car deserved to be blown up. And they're very touchy about that. That was my first experience with Black Panther, but we didn't care at that time, so it didn't even matter. But the product placement side, I'd say I think the iffy thing, and the reason why I love Hal, is I've worked with product placement guys before. I would say until I met Hal, 100% of them were terrible. And they are literally just trying to check a box and saying, I can get this in this film, this in that film. They don't even tell you that it's non-paid. They won't even educate you. And this is early on. Like, you really have to have someone very early on like Hal telling you, this is really how the industry works. I want to take care of you. But I think that's why I trusted Hal, because he adds that value. But it was really interesting. I had a product placement when I was at Karma. And there was a boxer, a very well-known boxer, who wanted to do a product placement with us. And I knew him. And I'm like, that's fantastic. Yeah, he's got this. He's coming back and he's going to promote this on his channel. And he's got a documentary being filmed right now. And fortunately, I actually just Googled him to kind of see what he was up to. And he was arrested for like anal rape. And it was in the news, and they specifically said that word. And I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, how on earth am I going to, why is this guy bringing him to me? It's got to be a mistake. And then the product placement guy comes back to me and goes, well, no, that's all settled. They settled out of court. I'm like, that doesn't matter. I can't put this guy in our vehicle. There's no way. This can't happen. But he didn't tell me that. Had I done it, one, I'd be fired. Like, there's no way around that. I'm going to be fired. But and I'm like, I can't trust this guy. Like, the piece that I love about Hal is that Hal really does care about the product and the companies he works with when he's putting them in the film. And I'm going to say this right now. Hal is not sponsoring this podcast at all. I'm bringing him on because he's like the godfather of product placement in film and TV. And he was an amazing guy for me to learn from. But, and I'll give you an example. When I was working with DeLorean, I was fortunate enough to know the producers of that film. I didn't necessarily need product placement to get into Fast X, which was amazing. A very easy thing to do. Hal was the only one who sent me a picture of my vehicle in production. Like he took a picture of it while it was there, and he's like, "Hey, I'm here." Like he wasn't even part of the project, but I knew that Hal was kind of taking care of me while that vehicle was at the production.
Right. He actually maintained a relationship with you through this process.
Yeah,
and that's not normal.
Yeah. I don't know what normal is because I don't do it anymore. I typically only work now with the studio or producers or someone like that. But if there's something hard for me to get, like Hal's got, I did an episode of This Is Us with Hal. And Hal's on set. Like Hal is like, when I drove the car there's no handler. Like there is a handler, but Hal's the handler. Like the car comes and Hal's there on set, making sure the car's there, making sure it's being taken care of. Hal was also making sure that we had one episode of, what was it? Fresh Prince. What was it called, Hal? Bel Air. That was the next generation of Fresh Prince, which was Bel Air. Yeah. I ended up putting some cars in that show with Hal, and I think they kept them for like a year. It was a long time. Like we never see those cars again. But Hal called me up and goes, listen, they're going to smoke a cigar in the car. And I want to make sure that that's okay with you. And that would never happen. Like some brands are a little bit iffy on people smoking or doing things in their car that might affect the brand. They wouldn't necessarily tell me. The good thing about Hal too is when he does an engagement like this, he always sends the script. He says, hey, here's what the script's going to look like. Just so you're aware of what the car or brand or product you have is going to go through. And he's always watching it, which is amazing, because the only time I've ever been invited on set was Atlas, which was on Netflix, and Fast X. And you're allowed to be on set when your product is
right
there. Now, it's not always easy for me to go on set and know what's right and what's wrong. Hal being on set, he's got this eye of, he knows what the product should be doing, how it should be displayed. And if there's anything wrong with how it's placed, Hal's like the guy on set that says, hey, can we do it differently this way? Or it's just amazing to have someone like Hal on set. And I'll preface again, he's not paying anything to be on here. He is merely just really good at what he does. But I
was going to ask, you're talking about kind of Hal being the man, like essentially managing the brand in a way, in a space where you don't know what's proper and how the production is going, and they kind of leave you in the dark. They'll let you come on if your product is there, but otherwise you really don't know what's going on. Hal, being on the other side of things, how do you navigate the space? How did you even learn to navigate the space? How did you get into product placement?
So I always had a passion for things that maybe kids at the time would overlook. I would always watch TV commercials and think a little bit more about, like, why is that person doing what they're doing, or what are they trying to sell me? And as I grew older, but still as a younger kid, I got more fascinated with the business side of entertainment. Why are we seeing the movies we're seeing? How are they marketing it to us? And I dreamed up a career of, if I could combine these things of advertising, marketing, and the business side of entertainment, that would be what I would do. And it took me moving out to LA right after I graduated college for a job that ultimately didn't transpire, to learn that there was, in fact, an entire business that's actually been around much longer than I ever imagined out here, mostly here in Hollywood. And as soon as I learned that, I essentially just willed my way into it. And within a few years, I was doing it, and I've been doing it ever since. So, what is one of many things that surprised me about this industry, and now having been a 20 plus year, in it, it's common, but getting into it, and every time we talk about it to people who aren't experienced or don't know much about it, they don't realize how big the industry is. But Troy, you just shed some light, although I would dispute some of those numbers,
Larger or smaller?
Smaller. Although I've seen PQ Media, some of those same stats go even larger. But I think it comes to, it almost feels like, to take a quick aside, the Forbes billionaires list, they can only do so much to verify that type of information. Elon Musk isn't sharing his bank statements, right? And his financial investments. They're doing their best, and they're guessing from the information that's kind of readily available.
But we're in the billions. Like, we're in the billions, whether it's 1 billion, 2 billion, it's a large portion of marketing that's being spent on paid and unpaid product placement.
Yes, but only when you look at every single possible avenue, and not necessarily the dollars being spent, but the value that it provides. Okay. So when we talk about numbers, and you really have to go a little deeper to understand even what we're talking about in the world of product placement, the majority of product placement, and here's the big surprise for everyone who isn't informed about this, is free. And you say, well, wait a minute, you just told me it's billions and billions of dollars. How can you say the majority of product placement is free? I will tell you with 20 years and great confidence that 99.9% of all product placements are just done on a barter, where we are giving inexpensive or lending fairly or more expensive products for potential use in TV or film, because those products have inherent value. I've
got to say, that's one of the most surprising things to me, is because from my perspective, going at, like, from the outside perspective, I think there's millions being changed in hands on any given product placement. But it makes sense that it's mostly on a barter system, and that it's operating off of inherent value, because these are brands that are established, and the movie also has its, the director also is carrying their own weight. So there is a tit for tat. I'm wondering, you kind of alluded that even you were surprised going into it, kind of the history and the weight of the industry coming forward. What would you say is, like, how did product placement kind of start, and what was the trajectory of it to get to something as huge of an effort as the Barbie movie, or what we're seeing today?
But it took coming out here, working in the industry, learning the history, building relationships, where you learn stuff that you felt anecdotally, you got some real stats and facts behind it. So when you talk product placement, it feels like it's like brand new. That's just like a new thing that you can do today, when in fact, product placement's been around since the invention of film. The first film ever made in 1896 featured a product placement. Believe it or not, the guys making the film and the distributor of that film also had an interest in a business selling soap, the Lever Brothers. Remember the soap Lever 2000? It was the parent company and the Lever Brothers who partnered with the Lumiere brothers to feature in their first film ever made. It's called Washing Day in Switzerland. Featured boxes of Lever soap. It's crazy. So when you talk about like something that's new, it's not new. And it keeps coming back because I'll always say when you want to talk about the world of product placement, what's old is new and nothing's new because it only just comes back. So anything like the Barbie movie, which feels like so branded and such a novel approach to create a feature film based on a toy. Well, no, it's just not that new. It's just when done well. Show you kind of the history. It starts with the invention of film, right? In 1896. And there are several important moments in time that take the product placement industry to today of where we are. So after that first ever product placement, okay, we don't see that much going on where it's such an active and, overt type of marketing tactic until about the 1930s. But that's on radio programs. This is way older for any of us to even say we remember because none of us were born yet. But if you think of, when I say what's old is new, if you think of the podcasts that many of us, and me included, like to listen to, and you hear those live read ads, well, in the 30s, if you're trying to be entertained, this is before TV goes mainstream, you're listening to radio programs. And all those radio programs are sponsored from brands, and that selling that advertising time is what helps fund all of these different programs. And then you go into the 1950s as TV starts to proliferate. In order to get TV made, you need to fund it. And who better to fund it than advertisers and bringing them from radio over to TV, and where the idea of soap operas got coined. Do you know why? Sammy?
What, did they stand on a soapbox?
No. So these were TV shows that were created primarily to sell to the stay-at-home moms. And the majority of the advertising that was done was trying to sell the detergent for the moms to use to do the laundry for the family. So all of a sudden now soap operas are born. And then right around that same time, the biggest shows on TV are actually brand sponsored television. Now, if I was going to tell you to tune on to Netflix, after we're done with this, to watch your favorite show, Love is Blind, which is, from the recent stats, the biggest reality show on TV as a whole, right? Love is Blind, massive. What if it was the P&G Love is Blind show? You'd think, wow, that's really overt and probably not something that I want to do, and that's taking away from the credibility of this show that I love. Well, what if before you watch Love is Blind, the hosts come out and sing an entire jingle trying to get you to love and buy Tide soap?
I think I would turn off the show.
Insane, right? Well, coming back to it, in 1950s, the biggest shows on TV were brand-sponsored television. And the Texaco Star Theater with Milton Berle was the biggest show in the country. And it got something like a 60 rating, which meant that 60% of the entire country was watching the show. And I urge you, or anyone listening to this, to go on YouTube and look it up. And you'd see the show would start with a dance number and a jingle telling you why you should be using Texaco for gas for your car. And if that wasn't insane enough, and you had the name of the brand in the show, at the end, they did the whole thing again, an entire jingle, again, talking about Texaco Star Theater and why you use Texaco gas for your car. It's insane. But again, what's old is new, and this is how things keep moving. So, 1950s, you see like brands really having a big part of TV, but it was totally accepted as normal because that's just what was done. So, the next big movement in product placement would take place in many people's favorite movie, E.T., right? For E.T., the writers had M&Ms written into the script, and they went out to the brand to see if they would approve the use of it and potentially help promote the film when it came up. And the executives at Mars looked at it and thought, I don't want an M&M eating our candy. It's going to scare kids. It's going to actually have the the adverse effect. It's not going to help us sell. And they said no. So they then went to a relatively unknown upstart brand in Reese's Pieces and offered them the product placement opportunity in exchange for a promotion to help promote this movie. And there we see the biggest, or let's say the first instance of not only a branded product placement, but into a film promotion. And as we can go over, many times over, the best product placements are done that are the ones that have positive business outcomes. And that one was a massive one where in exchange for about $1 million in today's money in promotional support to promote that film, E.T., they drove a 65% increase in sales.
There was that tit for tat kind of deal. Would you say that's kind of where the barter mutual benefit relationship really started becoming normalized?
So it's in that deal that it became clear that you could do more than product placement and you can have an amazingly positive outcome, right? Because as I mentioned, product placement was always around. And then it became even more apparent in a brand funded type of way that helped fund radio shows and then TV shows. But with ET, we see more of a collaboration between film and brand, where it's more than a barter. It's more than I can give you my product to use. It's we'll actually help you promote this movie. And being in the movie, on top of helping promote the movie, delivered an astronomical outcome. If you go to Troy, I'm sure will agree. If I gave you the opportunity in any brand that you were overseeing to, with one project in 1 year, increase your sales by 65%, would you do that? When talking about the history of product placement from the brand sponsored TV shows in the 1950s into the brand marketing partnerships with ET, from just the product placement into the promotion, things continue to kind of keep going. But the next important moment of time was in the early 2000s when you started to see reality show programming. And in those early 2000s with shows like Survivor and The Amazing Race, and then most famously The Apprentice, but other shows like The Restaurant, brands started to feel like in that 1950s version again, where they were dedicating big portions of the show to stump for brands. And that changed things again forever, because brands started to feel like they had a seat at the table and could have some actual say in how they were used. Where again, traditional product placement, if you send those products, you have no say, you have no guarantees. But with these brand sponsored integrations and segments, you actually could say, I need to do this and I need to do that. And a lot of that was actually really bad. But through the trial and error, it helped us get to a place where you're seeing them in almost every piece of content that you're watching, and they're done really well.
And I think it's amazing. I think one thing that really also prompted this conversation, which is why I wanted to get you on to talk to Sammy. I talked to Sammy about the podcast, and a lot of things I wanted to do on the marketing side was kind of educate people on marketing and product placement. Sammy said something to me. She was watching a show, and I want you to repeat it, Sammy, because it was sort of profound, which was, you're watching this TV show, you're ingrained in it, and you're part of this universe. And then what happens?
Yeah, I remember I was watching a show on Prime Video, I think, and it was really good. I think it was The Boys. Love a lot of their series. I was watching this one and fully in it. It was like their latest season. There's all this storyline built up. We're like at an intense climax episode where all the loose ends are coming together, and all of a sudden there were they do this video call on Zoom to try, because they didn't happen to be in the same place, and that was the reasoning. And I was like, what the? It took me out of the world. It was like I was fully invested in this story, and then they try to make it weave it in, but it was not very well done. And as a result, it took me out of the storyline. And then I was back into our reality where I have to do Zoom for classes and stuff like that. and it just didn't make sense to be in their world. And as a result, it interrupted my enjoyment. And as such, I was not happy to see Zoom next time around. And I think that's the thing. It's like good versus bad product placement. It's, is it seamless? Does it make sense? Does it add to the story, or does it take me out? And one of the things because I also, like Hal was talking about how he got into product placement, and because he used to pay, he would pay attention to these commercials and why do people do what they do? Growing up, and the more I got into marketing, the more I started paying attention in the media I was consuming. I'm like, I loved seeing, Easter eggs of reality in media. And I also, but I would equally find things such as this where I would get frustrated and be like, this is awful and you're ruining it. Why are you doing that? So I'd love to hear your guys' kind of perspective on why do these like half-baked product placements even happen, and what is the difference between good and bad product placement, and how do they even come about? How does something result in a successful product placement in your eyes, Hal, versus something like that would, take a viewer away from the experience?
Well, let me ask Hal this too, because you'll answer this at the same time, Hal. I asked you early on, I'd like to know the difference between brand integration, product placement, and then story branded placement. So with what Sammy just said, where within those categories does something like that overtly happen? And I may have not had these categories down correctly. I want you to educate me on what are the categories of product placement? And then where within those categories does something overtly like that happen, where it's really just, where's my Nissan Mirai? I parked it outside. How does that happen? In what categories does it happen in?
Okay, lot to unpack here. So you're talking about product placement, which for better or worse has become this catch-all term where anytime a brand is doing something somewhere, whether it's in TV and film content where the idea really started, or anywhere else out in the world, it's product placement. But if you work in the business of product placement like I do, we think about it very differently. So product placement is two meanings. It's the catch-all term, but the art and the act of product placement is just trading, and as I mentioned, bartering products for potential use. There's no guarantees, right? We didn't sign a contract. We didn't pay any money. You're doing something. You're creating a TV show or film. I have products that can help you either decrease the budget or align with a character. And then we do that barter. Ideally, it gets shown and we get the benefit of being on screen. That's the barter product placement. Then you have like paid product placement or product integration, where you have a deal and a cooperation where you are guaranteed specific exposure, ideally with some brand messaging to be worth paying for when you do have an option, although there are no guarantees, to just send your product, right? And that is guaranteed with a contract payable upon exposure. And it's in that area where you get to see some very good stuff and some unbelievably awful stuff, some organic stuff and some inorganic stuff. What you mentioned about someone calling out the Nissan Mirai, I'll never forget watching 24, the Kiefer Sutherland massive show on Fox, where you're watching the show and it's big moments, and all of a sudden he stops and he's like, "No, over there, the Ford F-150," and you're like, "Wait, what? We're calling out cars, make and model in cars now?" Like, no one talks like that. No one. And the problem there is, what happens is, if you don't fully understand what we're trying to do, you are likely to do it wrong. So good product placement is when you notice that a brand is there, but not so much as to be taken out of the content that you're watching. And successful product placement is where you do that, only you have a positive business outcome from participating in it. That's when you see you're in ET with Reese's Pieces and your product sales go through the roof. That is a successful product placement. You just seeing a show that you love that's using lots of products that, over a series of time make you think better of that product is the way that product placement, when done right, works. So there is a psychological effect that when you watch characters that you like and enjoy, whether it's on the big screen or at the screen at home, however big it is, or your mobile phone that you watch it, however you consume your content, when you see characters you like and enjoy using certain products, using certain services, you are going to psychologically think better of those products. And that is ultimately why product placement works. So if you're just subtly having products in a series of TV shows and films over time, you're going to slowly help change brand perceptions, drive better consideration, and ultimately get all the way down to the funnel and drive sales. But to speed that up, you can create these partnerships like the Reese's Pieces and ET, like all the different stuff that I'm trying to do every day, where not only are we in the TV show or film, but ideally we're promoting and around it, and we're helping speed up the factor of changing your mind to better consider a product, getting you into a place where you'll go and buy it. You don't always have to do the whole big program. The Reese's Pieces on its own did a number, did an incredible job for that brand, and that's happening every day. But there are ways to speed it up. So going back, we have barter product placement, paid integration or paid product placement. Mm-hmm. Then I'd say the next step and part of our business is doing partnerships. So if it doesn't make sense, or you couldn't get into the TV show or film, or maybe it's a period piece or in another planet or prehistoric or whatever it is, right? There's still a massive opportunity for brands to partner with those IPs, because something I also knew anecdotally, but thanks to our clients and the reams of research and third-party research they do on the programs that we do, if our brands are going to run a traditional advertisement or an advertisement with a big IP, that's your superhero films, your Barbies, the White Lotus, any of that stuff that we know people are super excited about, there is no comparison that when you do the branded partnership, the ad completion goes up, the engagement goes up, the brand consideration, the brand love, all those metrics are going to go up. And we've seen this time and time again. And thanks to our clients doing that research and them sharing it with us, we're able to better understand why this stuff works. And it comes back to us as a business, or just me personally. My North Star has always been the best way to market to your consumer is in and around the content that they enjoy. Mm-hmm. So if we can't get in the film, we have a whole nother bite at the apple to promote around the film or the TV show, right? So product placement, paid placement or integration, and now there's this partnership or co-branded partnerships, co-branded promotions. Those are the three most used avenues. And again, when they go wrong is because people are losing sight of what we're trying to do. And we pride ourselves in understanding the three most important points. You have the brand who's looking to drive change and a positive business outcome. You have the production who's trying to create the best content that they possibly can. And sometimes they're going to have a need for funding or marketing, and will allow them to be susceptible or just open to working with that brand. But then you can't forget about the most important part, and it's the end consumer. Who's going to watch it and how are they going to respond to that content? Now, if they're taken aback, if you're watching Zoom in The Boys and you just don't think it belongs there, it's going to take you out of the content, and that doesn't work. But if it's so quick that you don't even recall it, the brand lost their opportunity. So all the best stuff is sitting in the middle. It's got to be just good enough to make you think about it, but not enough to take you out of it.
The impact of that's not going to happen until much later. And what I talked with Hal about, and this is really a thorn in my side too, is there's a lot of startup companies right now that could absolutely use product placement, especially if you're a young brand. And especially when you consider, if you're a startup company, brand new brand, brand new product, you are 100% conquest. You have no loyalty. So the best way to do that in a very quick amount of time, and then these brand adjacencies. So you're not just working with Netflix. You're not just working with NBC Universal. You're not just in Fast X. All of those adjacencies are making your brand stronger and your product stronger. I've had many times where I've proposed to Hal, hey, I got this company, and Hal will reach out to me and say, hey, do you got someone? And for whatever reason, these brands, because they're, I think, so personal to the founders, they have very strong opinions about not putting their product in particular pieces of theatrical entertainment or branded content, because they feel like their brand is either not adjacent to that brand, or they don't want that sort of a relationship with it.
Would you say it's like risk aversion more than anything?
No, I honestly, just to be completely blank or completely blunt about it, they feel like their brand is bigger than the brand they want to participate with. They feel like what they have is more important. That, well, it's my brand, and I don't feel like this particular product should be with Kim Kardashian because I don't like Kim Kardashian and she's not our customer. I'm like, you're out of your fucking mind. Like, Hal will say, this is a global show. You're a startup. No one knows who you are, but we can have that in the film. It could be front and center. And Hal's going to be on set to make sure that it's being portrayed correctly. And they'll say, pass. I'm like, I don't think you understand. You got the email, right? And you saw the script and you know who's producing the show and you know who's going to be in the show. They're like, yeah, it's just not right now. And Hal makes it so easy. And the issue for me is, what if it's not you, it's going to be somebody else. It's 100% going to be somebody else. And I can't tell you the ego that some of these companies have with making sure that their brand is portrayed correctly. I understand that. I 100% do. But when you don't have a brand and it's in your head, you have the biggest ego where you can be very significant in a very short amount of time if you just did this thing. And I remember getting to Hal, and there'd be 2 passes with this particular show. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, they don't want to do it. And he's like, well, if it's not them, it's somebody else. Yeah. I think that's a huge piece, Hal. Like, I don't know why anybody would turn down. I have issues with something like The Boys.
A little bit more.
If I were a CMO of a large company and I had a chance to be in The Boys, I'm not going to tell you any of the graphic stuff that I've seen in The Boys that I would be like, I don't think our brand is adjacent to this one, but it wouldn't rule out being in the show, just not in that particular scene or being somewhere within that environment because it's such a popular show. But Hal, why do people say no? Like, do people pass all the time on these things?
People pass more than they should. And I think it comes down from a general lack of actually understanding what it is, how it works, and the benefits of it. And maybe that's on us. Maybe we need to do a better job of taking them through the history and not only our own successes, but the successes over time and how brands have literally been built on the backs of product placement. And when you work with someone like us, we're also breaking down all the barriers to entry. But I think just a lot of these brands don't understand that it can be done. It can be done inexpensively, and it can have wildly positive outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think just really quickly too, the downside. So when I think there was I'm not going to say the name of it because they're not sponsoring the show anyway. There was an EV motorcycle company. You were working, you asked me, we got them involved. At the end of the day, that particular bike didn't work for the show. Now, one thing I learned from Hal very easily was that getting in front of producers, regardless, is an amazing step because it may not be the project this time, but now they understand the brand, they understand the vehicle, they understand the product. It is now a consideration for everything else they're going to do. There is no downside to saying yes, and eventually if they go, it just didn't work this time. I think just getting your foot in the door is amazing, and things trickle down really easily. One of the biggest risks I took was doing FastX, and there's risk involved because you don't really understand how the vehicle is going to be portrayed. You get the script, but having someone on set like Hal to make sure that the brand is going to be okay is a huge step. Having that experience, just making sure I got in the door with FastX. The next thing that happened was Rossum Thurber, director, pretty famous director, did Central Intelligence and a bunch of other movies. He just heard that this vehicle was going to be in FastX, and he's like, I'd love this to be in Red Notice 2 and 3. So once you start getting into that movement and you're getting involved with the product, then it just starts coming to you. the caveat to that is I would never probably do that again without Hal, because here's the problem. I had, when we did Fast X, I was also launching the brand at Pebble Beach in California. Huge event. The car was being shipped from Italy to LAX, and then it had to be trucked to Pebble Beach. Had to be on Pebble Beach on the lawn at a particular time. Then it had to leave Pebble Beach, get trucked back to LA, then be on the set of Fast X. So the issue is that there's no Hal involved. Like, this is really just transportation companies moving one product to the next and making sure, they're not really. And the car got in an accident, like it got damaged, and there's one of one. There's only one vehicle like that in the world, and it got damaged. So if you look at Fast X and you see that it's gray, it's because it's wrapped, because there was damage to the rear bumper. I think having someone like Hal be there, like a true professional, making sure that the product is getting there as safely as possible, is paramount. I think that's just another cue of what Hal is really good at, and why you need someone in product placement. So it's not just these startups that don't understand that you're going to get your foot in the door, but you're also going to get an advocate of your brand, that Hal's going to go to every other production he knows that needs something like this. But again, I think what you're saying is true, Hal. I don't think they understand the benefit, the actual long-term benefit. And you know what? They're going to fail anyway. 90% of these companies are going to fail. You might as well do whatever you can to make it succeed. And if you have an affiliation with Kim Kardashian, who cares? I just don't get it. Lastly, and this is my sort of plug for you, because you had mentioned it before, the types of, I guess, genre of television and movies. Like you had mentioned, period pieces in marketing. So I did my own little research. I'm a huge Queen's Gambit fan. And what I noticed within Queen's Gambit, you can do period pieces with product placement. They did a really good, it wasn't overtly done, but they were going into a newsstand, because she would constantly go in there and get a newspaper. And what you would see in the background is Time magazine, the retro versions of what those magazines would look like. And they used the covers of those magazines for the time period that she was in. And within the newspaper store, there were also products that existed during that time period. So it was really interesting to see that. The only thing that I thought that was interesting is that I don't think Time magazine or any of those companies that were in Queen's Gambit in that period piece took advantage of being in that. They could have reproduced cover versions in the 1950s and 60s and did a sort of a Queen's Gambit side of merchandising or spin-off of what that used to look like. And they didn't do it.
The marketing budgets that we have to pull from is all about promoting the next product. So it's going to be extremely rare that we're going to put money behind something, in a heritage or, antique or that kind of version, because we want to sell you what's new. But there are a handful of instances where that did type of happen. If you think of the Back to the Future films, were massive opportunities for Pepsi and Nike, right? But traditionally, it just doesn't make any sense to kind of put money behind your old stuff because you want to promote the new stuff. However, the smart marketers will take that opportunity and align with that property when it comes out, and will showcase that heritage of the brand and then point them in the pathway of where the future of the brand's going. And that's a great way to do it. So you mentioned Queen's Gambit. The biggest opportunity that we saw from an outcome perspective of that show coming out wasn't in the period products that were featured, but do you know what it was?
For Queen's Gambit?
Queen's Gambit. What's the biggest thing that came out of that show?
I saw a lot of alcohol in that show. I saw a lot of drinks in that show. That's all I saw.
Sammy, did you see the show, or should I just go right in?
I haven't. Do spoil.
Well, this won't spoil from you watching the show, which you absolutely should do because it's great. But the biggest thing that came out of Queen's Gambit was the massive increase in people playing chess, especially women, because it's more traditionally, male-based sport for whatever reason. So, when we talk about great IP and great stories as the power to change minds and change perceptions and derive new behaviors. So case in point in this, we're seeing more people playing chess because they enjoyed the show so much. And if you are the brands in that, you get to benefit from it. But the reality is anyone loosely associated with the game of chess was able to benefit from that show coming out. But during the production of that show, no one expected it to be a bona fide hit, right? It was a total surprise, like Squid Game.
Yeah.
So that's when those happy, I don't want to say accidents because it wasn't, but like a great surprise in new behaviors and new fandoms that get created, because TV shows and films, and especially the good ones, become a part of pop culture, and what's a part of pop culture shapes our behaviors.
Yeah.
So let me
What we
ask
do,
you,
how we think.
Yeah, let me ask you about genres then. I've done this before with you, but I want to do it with Sammy. We talked about period pieces, right?
Yeah.
What about horror?
So what's interesting about horror is that it is such an increasingly popular genre. It is one of the few can't miss box office successes. If you can create a low budget horror film and market it the right way, you are almost guaranteed to not only make your money back, but to make some real money on it. And what we're seeing as a consumer base, the increase in not just overall viewership of horror-based titles, but interestingly enough, it's young girls like 16 to 34 that are becoming huge fans of this genre. And part of that is because of this new kind of light horror that I think really started back many years ago with the Scream franchise, which had just enough jump scares to make it horror, but really it's more about a thriller and a fun type of film. But we're seeing it today with Stranger Things and Wednesday, and go back to I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is currently being rebooted. Because of that popularity of what I call light horror genre, it's a massive opportunity for brands to get involved. But still, horror is just not getting brands comfortable to come in and play, because it's just very hard to get a brand to want to sit besides a masked murderer and a serial killer and stuff like that. Even though the content is great, even though the viewership continues to increase, it's just a lot harder to partner with it. The light horror, the Five Nights at Freddy's and that kind of stuff is far easier.
So here's my problem with Succession. I'm not a millionaire. I don't even know half the products in Succession, and I think that maybe those products are meant for people who really understand wealth. Yeah, I don't even know what products exist for people who have, an unlimited supply of money. Like, are there products out there that we're just generally unaware of that are very high valued, that the brand piece to me wouldn't make sense because I wouldn't even have heard of them? Are you in that stratosphere of products?
So the majority of brands that we work with are everyday products, although we definitely work in the world of luxury where it's either aspirational luxury or bona fide luxury. So we worked on Succession, and Succession was a massive show on so many levels. As a fan of the show and a buff, or if not a buff, just a true fan of the history of the entertainment business and the moguls. And while I'm not the biggest reality TV fan, I love the reality of the infighting between something like a Succession, because that show, is obviously a work of fiction, but is also at the same time so heavily focused on Sumner Redstone and Rupert Murdoch and their families and their fights for succession. So that is like an epitome type of show for me. But it also, for the right brands, provided incredible opportunities. But you're touching on some important things. So yes, the costume designers, the prop masters worked so hard and specifically to outfit these characters in just the right products that took, at the time, what was known as kind of quiet luxury, where you did not see the big G's and LVs and H's, right? That is for a subset of a consumer. But for the ultra wealthy, you are quietly showcasing your wealth because you have to be in the know with the type of brandless stuff that you're going to be wearing, which is why watches became such a powerful thing to showcase on the show, and why we worked so hard to get our client IWC on the right characters in that show. Because as the show grew in popularity and people were really taking time to call out the products and the brands that they were seeing, it created a whole additional cycle and in a whole nother way where product placement can go out and help your brand. Because not only are you benefiting from being in the show or film, but people are talking about it and writing articles and doing podcasts and explainer videos on YouTube about it, about who wore what and why. And having our watches on different cast members of that show was an amazing thing after the fact. We were excited because we were fans of the show and saw its trajectory and why we were working hard. But what we saw in that last season, when we put watches on Roman and Cousin Greg and other characters, is people were calling it out. And we started to, I don't want to say punch above our weight in the sense because IWC is such a storied and strong luxury brand. But when you think of the upper echelon of watches and like the Rolexes of the world, we are even footing. Because in previous episodes or seasons rather, we saw Roman in a Rolex, but in this season, he's wearing IWC, and we sent several different watches for him to wear, and he wore 2 different versions during the season, and they popped in such amazing ways that people are starting to notice, to be seen. I think watches and cars are the 2 biggies in that show, but then there's a whole world of stuff that you would not even know unless you were a big fashionista or in that world where quiet luxury kind of takes hold, because it's very hard to find the branding. There's nothing sitting there on the sleeve or the patch, right? You got to have you have to have a knowledge about it, or you got to be a super fan. So yes, there is a lot of things that the lay consumer may not even realize. And it goes much deeper than you'd even think. Troy, we've talked about this before, about all the different guns that get featured in TV shows or films. Well, there's a massive business from those gun manufacturers to make sure that all the armories and the prop masters have all versions of those weapons so they can feature it, because they have an enormous effect in the consumer when they go out to a gun store. If they are an enthusiast, or if they want to go shooting or whatever they want to do, they will be influenced by the stuff that they see. And why, you think about in the 80s, especially, right, with Dirty Harry, right, and Clint Eastwood, and he and the gun are almost a part of the character, where we've talked about Ray Donovan and his car and the Mercedes that we put him in, right? Part of the character. You cannot break away Ray from his Mercedes, or some of these characters even from their guns. And while we do not represent gun companies, and that's not something I just personally would feel comfortable advocating against, it still is a big part overall in the TV and film business.
But you talk about John Wick. Like, John Wick is one of my favorite 1, 2, and 3. But what you said really resonated with me, because in John Wick 3, he goes into a gun shop. And he's sort of saying, "Hey, this is how my evening is going to go." And he's equating the gun to the food he's going to eat or how he's going to end the night. I became fascinated with Benelli M4, which is a 12-gauge shotgun, because that was what you end the night with. And then I was completely researching the Benelli M4, which is an Italian weapon. And
have you even heard of that weapon before seeing
not prior to that? No, I'd never even heard of it before. But then I'm like, oh, Benelli M4, maybe I need an Italian 12-gauge shotgun. And then I do my research on Benelli, and it's a really good brand, but I'd never heard of it before. So there's a way to do that. And when you touched on it, I'm like, yeah, they did that, and I became a fan of it. But the other thing that you said, and I want to make a correlation between this, because I think I would love to have had you teach me, because I know that you taught product placement in college, and I would love to have had your brain on this. Horror has a different placement if there is product placement, but the difference between when you talk about Succession, which is a family which is morally vague in almost every way, IWC is okay with morally vagueness. They're a horrible family. They do nothing that normal human beings would do, but
tough finding someone to root for in that show.
Yeah,
yes.
but I think the adjacency with those types of luxury brands, I'm not going to say they're villains, because in a sense, they are. They're when I watch the show, they are so far above my normal, like what I would do normally. Like I don't even think I would see those people in real life. But there's this thing about when they wear their suits, their Tom Fords, their IWCs. That is okay, but you can't put like Freddy Krueger in an IWC. But the correlation between a villain and a horror movie, I think it's interesting that villains can get away with being branded with certain things because I think those brands like that vagueness of the villain. I think the villain really does play well with some of these products. And so beyond like Roman, like what are some of the famous villains that you've seen that were either well dressed or branded very well with certain watches? So Sammy, would you have? So when you were in school, you clearly didn't get any of this product marketing. There was probably a light version of this.
Yeah, this is a whole new world.
Having listened to Hal, listening to Hal, would your career have changed if you just understood what Hal was talking about in terms of what he does? Would that have changed your narrative of what you wanted to do?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here's my thing. It's like conceptually, and he touched on it the same when he was starting his career of like, once your eyes are open to what the possibilities are, you go completely in. But you have the concept of it at least like foggy beforehand. When I was, before I even decided on what my degree, before I even decided I wanted to go into marketing, I had a fascination with product packaging and product placement and seeing kind of, because I found it annoying when it was done wrong, and I was there was a satisfaction in seeing something done in it being done seamlessly, something that worked with the consumer and actually added to whatever experience it was joining. And I knew and through that, I kind of figured, I was like, okay, I see this overlap in myself between art and reality in terms of business, like art and business. So that's what motivated me to get into marketing. And I was like, but going into it, it's like we talk about the theoretical in school, and I was just thinking, and same as all the classmates and everybody in college who's trying to figure out what they want to do with their life. I see this, I have this fascination. How do I even get there? What is the background on it? And there's so many multitudes of different niches you can get into in life. School cannot possibly teach you all of those things. You have to encounter them naturally. So getting to meet you, having this conversation, meeting Hal before this, it just opened it like a light bulb. I was like, that's what the job is. I'm like, that's the job that actually gets this done. Going back years, I see this, I see seeing the end product in high school and being like, how did this even come to be? It's like all connecting now.
Yeah. So I think, we're lucky to have Hal. I want Hal on this show quite a bit because I think we've only sort of scratched the surface of what product placement is. And again, there's the theatrical side, but there's a lot of other verticals within product placement that Hal exists in. So love to have you on again, Hal. I thought you did amazing as usual. I always learn a lot when you're on the show. And it's nice to see that Sammy sees that, the way it's presented, like there's this huge, and I think Hal said it early on. I don't like when people say marketing either, because it's like a very generic term for what marketing actually is. Like there's a ton of things that marketing is, and it's not this word that means
it's
everything.
Talked about generically, and people don't really get into the details of all the different.
Yeah, like you're in marketing. What subsegment of marketing are you in? What 100 verticals under marketing do you exist in? And you're like, yeah, you don't do marketing. There's something that you do within that. And I think it's really good to see on the product marketing side with Hal is, I think it's still complicated. And I think we still need to have a discussion with Hal moving forward. I didn't ask all the questions I wanted to ask Hal because we can do this forever. He'll be a part 2, 3, 4, and 5 as we go through these things. Yeah. But I wanted to thank you, Hal. I know we went over a little bit, but just amazing. And I'll end it at this. And I'm going to say it again. There's some real shitty people in product planning or product marketing, and you'll meet them. And that's with anything that you do. The issue is because what you're trying to put in is so incredibly important as your company. Like the investment you're going to make into putting this into a movie or a TV show You want a partner that really understands your brand and understands the risks that are involved and will educate you on those things and is with you 100% of the time. The worst thing is to get someone who's going to get you in a TV show or movie and is more excited about completing that task than being part of that relationship. I think that's the issue I have is the relationship side between what Hal does and what he does with these other brands. They trust him 100%. And you're going to meet some terrible people, Sammy, along your journey through marketing. My job is to put you in front of the very best, and Hal is that. So, Hal, thank you for being on, man.
Really, I would just want to say, like, I've really enjoyed getting to meet you and talk to you. I'm excited for the episodes in the future where we get to zero in on more topics and kind of delve into the nitty gritty of all your expertise.